Hey, Jared here from Next Developments. I've got three prospects on the go at the moment. One of them's got a bit of a hold up with it, so I'm kind of happy to let that sit and just put it on the back burner and leave it alone. It's kind of an outside element. Basically, a friend was a bit more progressed on his interest with it and his feasibility with it, so we just sort of agreed between us that we'd leave it. I'd step away and leave it alone for now, and just leave him to decide what he's going to do without the pressure or sort of time constraints on it. So that's, it was a good one, but there's always other options. So the other two are quite interesting. One of them's seriously steep, and the other one's ridiculously flat as a tack. And yeah, they're both interesting for different reasons. The steep one has heaps of land, thousands and thousands of square meters. If you just go straight by the planning regs, you could put just a hair under 17 townhouses on there quite happily. It's got gorgeous views, it's got a really nice northerly aspect, heaps of room. But for my money, I think we'd probably aim to more towards 10 or 12. But it's about whether we can sort of make the feasibility work with the soil issues. So after talking to my architect, it turns out that the soil guy who I'm using on my subdivision, geotech guys, he knows all of the details on this site too. So it'll be really interesting to have a chat to him today and say, well, just say what's going on and find out what I can about this property, essentially without having to pay anything, because it's already been looked at and talked about and done. So I know it was on the market a few years ago. It's currently off market, but my contacts have kind of said to me, look, we know the guy, we're happy to sell it. So it's an agent who I deal with quite a bit, and she's selling something else for him. So yeah, it's a good prospect. I've got a JV partner in Sydney who's kind of interested in that. It'll just be a matter of whether we can find a nice staged development model that allows investment in the block and then investment in the build, and do a staged release of the builds, and essentially sort of funnel that money in over stages. So this idea of keeping your investment level down by building 2 or 3 townhouses, then building 2 or 3 townhouses, then building the rest of the townhouses, and just putting in the minimum amount of investment along the way. So yeah, that's really interesting. The other one has a real substantial access issue, but it's flat. So yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm really kind of keen on it. It's got a parallel in a nearby town. It's a town just out of Launceston, the deal is, but the next town over has a very similar parallel with this developer who I've chatted to a couple of times before. I didn't even actually know it was his development. He basically built these 2-bedroom townhouses with space for a caravan or an RV up the side, and he built them in a big group and sold them off. And he built them at the front first and sold those, then he built them further back and sold those, and then he built them further back and sold those. And it was an interesting sort of stage development. I watched him build a bit of that, and I watched his construction techniques and stuff, which were actually really good. I really liked the way he put it together. My brother and I had a look through it a couple of times, and yeah, so it's a good parallel for what this block is if I can solve the access issue. But we've essentially got a neighbour who's got a really big driveway, and we've got a really tiny driveway that they'll never let us put like 14, 15 townhouses behind. And so basically I'm going to go to the neighbour and say, what if we knocked all this down, scraped it all clean, and put a really nice 2-way asphalt driveway up here with a little bit of landscaping around it, and then we gave you a really nice automatic opening gate. How would you feel about that? Like essentially, 50-50 would be kind of the ownership, if we could get the title to kind of line up right. Then essentially, if anything needed work on it later, it's just a straight body corporate pays 50%, these household people pay 50%, or maybe we get something written into the title sort of rules around the body corporate paying more. Obviously, one house is going to have a little bit less traffic down a driveway than 18 townhouses or 14 townhouses or whatever we end up getting on there. So yeah, that's a really good prospect. So yeah, both of those deals I've potentially got JV partners from, or for. Both are quite keen. I've talked to them about that, so they're both interesting. Yeah, so that if that goes well, townhouse development I've already got on the go goes well, and the subdivision goes well, yeah, it's going to be a busy kind of rest of the year. But it's nice, they're all kind of phasing out really well. So the DA on the subdivision's pretty much finishing off. The DA on the townhouses is just ramping up. Surveyor's just gone in and done his thing. And then we've got essentially 2 negotiations going on. One of them will be a nice slow deal, and the other one will be a bit quicker if we can, because we've essentially got a lot more cash to work with, so we can just fly into it, get the first couple of townhouses done, developed, built, pretty, and sold off, and yeah, really start sinking the cash in. So yeah, it's that stage development model is really interesting because it kind of reminds me of something Brad Cassidy did at a conference I was at recently. So anyone who's interested who Brad Cassidy is, just do some Googling on here, and he's a sort of a life coach and a personal trainer and a really successful real estate developer, and a really good speaker. So he talked about a development he was doing where essentially the first stage he had to sink cash in, obviously, to purchase and do all that, but by the time he got a little way into this development, he'd pulled all his cash out, and that meant that the later stages essentially became infinite return on investment because investment was zero. So I kind of like that idea, and it'd be nice to duplicate it and stand on a stage with him and say, look, I copied you, I did this idea too. So yeah, it's a nice idea, and I think my JV partner, she's less of a hurry and likes the idea of being able to move through it and maybe keep the last 2 or 3 townhouses just as part of her essential her profit share at the end of the deal, and just keep it as in her portfolio. So yeah, these are good fun deals.